Good evening, everyone. I am going to wait a minute to see if people come on. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about Piaget and Vygotsky and to clarify a few things with each of them. I was looking at some of your responses and some of your notes that you posted, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Maslow and hierarchy of needs, and then delve a little bit into moral development so that we can discuss some of those components. Make sure I have all my papers here. Yeah, okay. So one thing that you want to do when you're taking notes is that you want to make sure that your notes are detailed, because both the midterm exam, which I will open probably on Monday, and the final exam are open book, open note. You may not use outside resources. You may use anything posted on Moodle, but there is a time limit as to how much time you have to take either the midterm exam or the final. And the better your notes are, the more complete your answers will be. And because it is open book, open note, I do expect detailed and rich responses to the questions. I do not give multiple choice. I do not give true false, and I do not give fill in the blanks. Most of my questions are application based. So we'll kind of go from there. A little bit of reflection from my lamp overhead, I think. Okay. So I don't see anyone getting on at the moment. Let me check my email to make sure people are do not have questions about logging on. I'll send an email. Okay, all right. I don't see anybody popping on. So I want to first talk a little bit about when I asked you to compare and contrast Piaget and Vygotsky. Most of you did attempt to compare and contrast exercise. And here, when you're comparing and contrasting, you want to define both. So you want to give an explanation and an overview of Piaget, and you want to give an overview of Vygotsky. So if you think of a Venn diagram, and I can kind of share that with you. If we think about a Venn diagram and we have two circles, right? And here we would have Piaget. Whoops. And Vygotsky. Okay, and here would be how they are the same. Here you would describe Vygotsky, right? Zone of proximal development. And here Piaget, stages, right? Egocentric speech, right? And in the middle here, the most common thing here is constructivism. So they're both considered constructivists. And many of you did recognize, you did point out that Piaget, that Vygotsky read Piaget's work, but at the time in the Soviet Union, Vygotsky did not have, or Piaget did not have access to Vygotsky's work because they did not let his work out of the Soviet Union. So you want to kind of keep that in mind, and many of you did pick up on that point. However, in a sense, Vygotsky was influenced by Piaget, but more than that, Vygotsky disagreed in many aspects of Piaget's theory. Okay, so we are going to save that. We're going to get out of this here. Stop the share. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you're answering that type of question, you clearly identify the characteristics of both theories, and then you talk about how they are alike and how they are different. Piaget did classify education as passive and active, while Vygotsky had some different ideas, but both did believe that children do construct their own knowledge. So both Piaget and Vygotsky are constructivists, right? As opposed to behaviorists. And you read some information on behaviorism, right? Skinner is a behaviorist, Pavlov is a behaviorist, and they believe that outside influences shape your behavior, that we are all responding to different positive and negative influences in our environment in various ways, right? And that would be the behaviorist view, that praise, punishment, that is what shapes our behavior. Whereas constructivists believe that internally, we as individuals construct our own knowledge, and people can try to pour knowledge into us, but until we make sense of that knowledge, we're really not learning, okay? Now, where Piaget and Vygotsky differ is in the type of constructivism that they believed was occurring. So Vygotsky is what they would refer to as a social, cultural constructivist. He believed that your interactions with others, the social aspect, highly influenced your ability to learn. He also believed that your culture, the culture that you come from, has a direct influence on how you learn and what you understand, right? What do you bring to the table from that particular culture? And culture and language were extremely important. Where Piaget said that the environment itself was more important, not necessarily the culture within that environment, but that a child who had access to a rich environment that was constructed by adults, so the adults kind of frame the environment, the adults provide the resources, the adults are there to facilitate the learning, but they don't interfere with the learning. And in that sense, Piaget believed that adults, teachers, parents should not interfere with the learning. They should set up the environment. They should create the environment that is stimulating and enriching, and then take a step back and observe what's going on, make sure things are safe. But the child will construct their own knowledge, and you cannot push a child to achieve more than what they're ready for, okay? So Piaget believed that development preceded learning. So you had to develop to a certain stage before you could learn particular concepts, and that you could not push a child into learning faster than their developmental stage. So, you know, Piaget's stages, right? The pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage. So that he has those stages and he puts ages to those stages. He believed you had to stay within those stages. There's a little bit of crossover, but an adult really could not push the child to learn past their developmental stage. So development had to occur before learning occurred. Now, Vygotsky thought exactly the opposite. Vygotsky believed that learning happened first and that learning caused you to develop along the way. And adults and more experienced peers could push you that learning so that, and now there were limits, right? You can't typically teach a 3-year-old calculus, but where Piaget believed that children in the pre-operational stage of learning or the sensory motor stage, which would be very young infants, but let's take the pre-operational stage. The children in the pre-operational stage were not developmentally ready to learn reading and mathematics, that if you push them into that, it would delay their development. Whereas Vygotsky said that depending on where the child was in the zone of proximal development, and let me show you a little bit, I want to get out of this one. Whoops. Nope. I want to open a new one. So let me clear this. Okay, so if we have Vygotsky, so here we're talking about Vygotsky. Okay, and we're talking about the zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development. And if we can look at it this way, we look at it like a cylinder. So if we draw a cylinder here, okay, and Vygotsky would say there are 3 levels to this. Here is what he would call frustration. Okay, this is learning that frustrates the child. It's too hard. Okay, here he would say this is the independent level. Okay, this is what the child can do on their own. They're very successful. Here is instructional. This is the instructional level. This is where the teacher comes into play. So in this realm, whoops, let me switch to here. This is where teachers need to pay attention to where the children are learning. If you teach a child at their independent level, they already know the information. They can already read at that particular level. They can already solve those math problems. It's too easy. If you go above their head, so let's say you start working in decimals and the child's not ready, that's going to cause frustration. And if a child's frustrated, they're not really learning. You need to assess the child and find out where is their instructional, this is an I right here, instructional level. Okay, so this, and you do that through pre-testing. So if I give a student a pre-test and it will tell me where they are in that particular skill, then I know where to target my instruction. So this is the zone of proximal development. This here, the zone of proximal development, is all of this. And Vygotsky believed that a teacher could push a child as the instructional level becomes independent. It pushes everything up a level. So the frustration level will move down to the instructional level. The instructional level will move down to the independent, and the person is continuously growing. And in Vygotsky's view, so let me just save this. And we're going to exit out of here. In Vygotsky's view, that instructional level is continually moving throughout your lifetime. You should always be moving up so that what you were frustrated with will then become something you're comfortable with. That's the instructional. And soon what used to be frustrating to you is now really easy. So think about riding a bike. The first time you got on a bike, it was really frustrating. And if nobody was there to help you and to help you balance, many children would give up, or many adults would give up, but that person who kind of held onto the back of your bike as you were learning how to pedal and how to maintain your balance, right, on that bike, that person is the teacher, the more experienced peer, who's helping you learn to ride the bike. And now something that was frustrating is instructional. And then soon you take off, you're riding the bike by yourself, you don't need any help, you don't even need somebody watching you. Now you're at the independent level, right? So riding a bike is easy for you. If that person kept holding on to the back of your bike and you already had that skill, you would get irritated. And that's what happens in classrooms when children are in a classroom where the work is too easy. They get irritated with the teacher, they get irritated with their friends, and they start to cause problems. A child who is frustrated is going to act out. If they're frustrated with what's happening in the classroom, if they're frustrated with the material, rather than have their peers and others believe that they cannot do the work or that they're just not intelligent, they will act out and become a behavior problem. So that zone of proximal development is key to classroom teaching. And that's an important concept to understand, that Vygotsky believed that a teacher was integral and needed to be an active participant in the learning process, where Piaget believed the role of the adult, the role of the teacher, was to create a rich environment and to step back and observe and collect data. They could occasionally insert themselves into a situation, maybe answer a few questions, but only if the child or the learner was asking for that, okay? And it's not to say one is better than the other. There are certain times when the Piaget concept works well. For instance, pure inquiry learning in science. Often Piaget's theory works very well, that professor will set up a classroom, inquiry-based classroom, and let you go and try and struggle through that process yourself, right? If you're in a science lab where it's a cookie cutter lab, or it's a lab where there's a definite right and wrong answer, the professor or the teacher has set it up. Here's step one, you follow step one. Step two, you follow step two. That is a little bit closer to Vygotsky. However, because of the rigidness of what we call cookie cutter activities, sometimes there's not as much learning that is going on. Vygotsky believed, in addition to hitting students at the zone of proximal development, that instructional level, it was also important that language was occurring all the time in the classroom, so that people were sharing ideas, bouncing ideas off each other. And if a classroom was always quiet, he contended that very little learning is going on. He would say that there are times you need to sit and read information or ponder information as an individual, but that should not encompass the entire classroom experience for children. So I just kind of wanted to point out those particular areas that you need to be familiar with. So just remember, when you're comparing and contrasting, you have a very good understanding of both theories. You know how they're the same and how they are different. And you did, many of you did hit that right on the mark, and giving your understanding of both theories very well, and how they are the same and how they are different. Okay. Let's see, I'm just looking at some of your responses. If we go back to the speech, and I called it egocentric speech before, so both Vygotsky and Piaget identified this egocentric speech, and this egocentric speech occurs first in very young children, so that you will notice children what's called parallel play. And parallel play is when two children, say they're at the sandbox working together, and Keon is over here and Marilyn is over here, and they're both in the sandbox together, but they're both kind of like what I call in their own little world. They're talking. For instance, Keon might say, I'm gonna scoop this up and put it in the cup until it overflows, and this is gonna be my volcano. And Marilyn, is that the name I gave her? Marilyn is driving a little car in the sand, and she's talking, I'm going to go up this hill, and then I'm going to get to Susie's house, and we're going to play a game. They're both talking out loud, but that is identified as egocentric speech because they are not expecting a response from the other person that's right across from them. And that's also identified as parallel play. They're playing side by side in parallel, but they're not interacting together. There's no expectation of interaction. There's no expectation of a response to my saying that I'm making a volcano. I'm just outwardly verbalizing the thoughts that are going on in my head. And Piaget identified that speech as egocentric speech and that it was meaningless, that it really had no function. The child was just babbling as they were playing. Whereas, on the other hand, Vygotsky, when he observed that same egocentric speech, and to keep the two separate, researchers typically call Vygotsky's private speech, though he did not coin that term. He did call it egocentric speech, but to keep them separate, we often say that Piaget studied egocentric speech and Vygotsky studied private speech, to keep them separate. But Vygotsky's observations of that speech, he recognized that that speech had meaning to the child's learning, that what really was happening is the child was speaking to self-regulate their learning. It self-regulates their behavior and it self-regulates their learning. So they're problem solving. So as Marilyn is driving the car through the sand, she's solving problems as to which direction and how the car needs to go, where the destination is, and would come to some learning aspect out of that interaction. And Vygotsky contended that when we are in situations that are unfamiliar to us, that cause us some sense of frustration, if we verbalize our frustration, that's a way for us to regulate our learning. So think of yourself in a computer lab when the computer is not working, right? You're sitting in main 138 and you're working away, and all of a sudden, the paper you were writing, everything locks up. If you're sitting in the lab, you're probably going to hear people, if that's happened, talk to themselves or talk to the computer. They know the computer's not responding, right? If I'm sitting I do this all the time on a computer. I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Where did you go? Where is my paper? Where did it disappear? What should I do next? How can I get it back, right? I know the computer's not going to respond to me. They're not going to tell me where my paper went. But what I'm doing is I'm going through the files in my head. What should I do? What are the steps I need to take? What have I been taught in the past about retrieving a paper that has disappeared? Where might it be located, right? Where could I go search for that paper so that I don't lose all of my work? That's what you're doing, and that's exactly what young children are doing. And Vygotsky coined that as this egocentric private speech, and that as a central tool to learning. So he believed that that learning that occurs pushes us to develop. So the more we learn, the more we develop. That's Vygotsky. Piaget is, the more we develop, the more we learn. And that's the central difference in both of those theories. Okay. They're both stage theorists, and many of you identified that. They did believe that you go in stages. Piaget was a little bit more rigid than Vygotsky, but they do identify the work of each other. Okay, so I think I identified most of the key points. Vygotsky really believed in social interactions and culture. I think I said that before. Oh, Piaget did identify assimilation and accommodation. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is you take things in your environment and you blend them with your current understanding of the world. So you're assimilating. You're not changing the way that you think or the way that you view something. So for instance, let's take a 2-year-old. And a 2-year-old has a dog at home and they're learning that's a dog. So they point to the animal and dad says, dog, that's a dog. You know, we pet the dog is our pet, the dog has 4 legs, the dog barks. So the child is learning what a dog is, right? So they're starting to go through that process. Now they're driving in a car and they pass a farm and they see a cow. What are they more likely to say? Dog. They'll point to the cow and they'll say dog. They're assimilating. They're taking that 4-legged animal. Their knowledge is 4-legged animals are called dogs. So now every 4-legged animal I see, I'm going to call it a dog until somebody in the car, dad says, cow, that's a cow, not a dog. Cow says moo, dog says woof. And the child begins to accommodate the understanding of that definition of dog and that definition of animal, that there can be more names for a 4-legged creature than dog. So that's when I'm accommodating my understanding of a 4-legged animal. Okay? And we assimilate and we accommodate throughout our lives in different situations, right? When you're first moving to college, you tend to assimilate. You tend to apply things that you learned about living at home to living in college until you find out that when your alarm clock goes off at 7 o'clock in the morning and you turn it off 3 times, mom's not coming in the room to say, it's really time to get up, you're going to miss the bus, or you're going to be late for school, right? You now have to accommodate to that new way of living. You have to change your thought process and your understanding of how things are going to work. Okay, so that's an example of that. That also is an example in college life. You begin to accommodate when you learn that in college, a lot of the learning occurs outside of the classroom. You're not in class every day for 50 minutes every day with one teacher for one subject, and that most of the learning occurs inside the classroom, right? Many students get themselves into trouble when they assimilate that idea. They sit in class, they do 30 to 40 minutes of homework in that class that worked for them in high school. I'm assimilating that concept to college. Yikes, I didn't pass that test because I wasn't doing the 3 hours a week work outside of the classroom as is expected, right? I was relying on just the information taught in class, and that was going to get me through, and then students will then have to readjust. That's what accommodation is. You readjust how you think about things, your definitions. You have to change. You as the person has to change when you accommodate. When you assimilate, not a lot of change is occurring, okay? All right. I think that most of the things I wanted to talk about were covered there. Make sure that when you post your notes, I can see them, and make sure that the topic is appropriate. So under the moral development, take another look at your notes under moral development, and make sure that they're on moral development. I read one that was on Piaget and Vygotsky, and I think I wrote a little note in the comment section under Moodle, so you want to check those comments that I put up there. And if I make a comment that says, this doesn't have enough information on moral development, I'm not going to go over moral development tonight because I kind of want to get into a conversation about moral development and see how that goes. I'm trying to see if anyone responded. I will make a recording of this. I was going to talk about Maslow. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Maslow talks about our needs and what do we need first, right? We need food, shelter, the basic human needs to survive. That's at the the foundation, right? Maslow says if we don't have that, we can't move up to the higher levels, right? We can't learn. We can't experience comfort or love until we've been fed, until we're warm, until we're safe, right? Our physical needs are met. After that, we can move up into the other hierarchical levels of Maslow. And let me just get to them here. Okay, so in his base needs, those are our physiological needs, and then our safety needs come next. Our safety needs are security, employment, resources, health. So we're fed, we have shelter, we have water, we have clothing, and then we can move up to feeling safe. So if you think about children in school, right? If they came to school hungry, they can't begin to feel safe. They can't begin to think about their health needs, right? They're hungry, they're thirsty. That's why we have free and reduced lunch in our public schools, because the government decided, they believed Maslow, they read his research, they believed that if children come to school hungry, no learning is going to occur. So let's feed them, and then we'll move on from there. So once children are fed, we can move up. School should be a safe place. Sometimes it's not always a safe place. They don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable in the classroom. That's the teacher's responsibility, to make sure that everybody is feeling safe and secure in the classroom. And that's an environmental relationship issue. Then they also need friendship. Once they feel safe in the classroom, once they're fed, they feel safe, then they can begin to develop friendships. They can be connected to the learning community. If children don't feel connected to the learning community, there are going to be problems in the classroom. Then you move up to esteem, right? And recognition, strength, freedom. You can start working on some of those kinds of things. And then finally, self-actualization, the desire to become the most that one can be. And that's where you can reach high levels of education, right? Because we've gone through all of these stages that Maslow contended. So Maslow's hierarchy of need is really important for teachers to understand. And we'll talk a little bit about Bloom a little later on. Many people will say, until you have addressed Maslow, you can't bring in Bloom. And you'll understand that when we get to the Bloom's taxonomy, but I'm not going to go over that tonight. Okay. So I think I've talked enough about some of the things. If you have particular questions, please feel free to email me. Next Tuesday, I'll have another session. I'll look at some of your work, and I'll try to fill in some of the holes of understanding that I see in some of your work. When we talk about moral development, I'd like you to take another look at pro-social behavior, right? Gilligan, Kohlberg's work on moral development, and the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional stages of moral development. Kohlberg's work is very interesting in that respect. And we'll also talk about justice-based morality. And you can kind of see how the pillars of moral development begin in school. It's one of the charges of schools, right, is to help children develop a community-based democratic way of thinking. And that is one of the responsibilities of public school education, is to promote that democratic way of thinking, that democratic way of life, and adhering to our principles laid out in the Constitution of the United States. So you can kind of see how all of this is connected. So this is where the Constitution is going to play into your lives again. Remember when you were learning all of those things, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and you had to memorize some things. Now all of that comes into play again. So brush up on some of those things, because you will be using them as you progress through either education courses or other courses on social justice or working within a community of learners. All right, good night. And if you have questions, please send me an email and I can answer questions. Hope it all is going well. You seem to be keeping up on your work. Keep pace with your work. Stay up on your work. If there's problems, I know there's been some Moodle problems, and I totally understand that because they redid everything on campus. But let me know as soon as possible because I can work with you. You can email it to me if it's not working for you. We can handle other modes. But I think most of you are being pretty successful. That we had a little glitch earlier with a couple of people, but I just had them email me their work, and that was fine. All right, I will post the midterm exam probably on maybe a little earlier than Monday. I might do it on Sunday. I'm going to my niece's wedding, so I might post it a little earlier. As soon as it is posted, what you want to do is you have a limited time. Once you open the midterm exam, you must finish the midterm exam, and you're going to put on there when you opened it, when you started, and when you finished. And the directions will be on the midterm exam as to how much time you have to complete it. It is open book, open note. It is not open internet, so you cannot type a question onto the internet and copy and paste information, right? I want you to use the resources that are available on Moodle. Any of the videotapes, any of these talks you may use as well. Please let me know if you have questions. I hope that if there's a better time than Tuesdays at 8 that we can meet, I can arrange, I can change this time, no problem. If you need it later, please let me know. I can make it later, and I'll send out an email to everybody. All right? I can monitor and adjust as needed. I hope to meet you all soon. I've gotten some good emails and some good feedback from you. Take care. Have a great rest of the week. I will be unavailable Thursday and Friday and Saturday due to my niece's wedding. I will check emails so I can email back and forth if there are particular questions. Good night and take care.